Hello, everybody. My name is Fraser Waldron, and in this video, I want to walk through one of the core or the foundational pillar or the foundation stone, let's say, of my own personal philosophy when dealing with difficult situations, both at the micro and the macro. I'm actually currently writing a book on this, and this is one of the main chapters that I just want to kind of share with you because I was typing away on it today, and I thought it'd be good to revisit this topic. I did a video on this previously, maybe 5 or 6 years ago, but I think I've updated my thoughts on it, and I think it's useful to share. So essentially, the core foundational piece that is my capstone, I guess, of my personal philosophy is something called existentialism, and more specifically logotherapy, which is written by a gentleman named Viktor Frankl, an Austrian psychiatrist who operated as in that profession in World War II and ended up in a concentration camp and observed some interesting things, and then came to the conclusion that the people who did the best in this essentially like worst case scenario, because I love worst case scenarios. If it doesn't work in the worst case scenario, why have it, right? So in the worst case scenario, he found that people who were religiously motivated, who had strong religion, strong Christianity, I guess in that context, and also people who had a strong sense of meaning generation. So they're able to generate meaning in the worst case circumstance. Those people did the absolute best because in his idea, in his framework, he would say that there were many things that you can generate meaning from. So you could generate meaning from, your pursuits. So your job, your works, like I'm an artist, I paint, or I'm a doctor and I help people, whatever. And then he also found that you could generate meaning from things like, for example, your family and friends, your relationships. And then also you could generate meaning from aesthetics, so like beauty in the world, things of that nature. And one of the interesting things that the Germans did in the concentration camps was that they specifically tried to take your will to live or your why away from you. So they would take, if you were a plumber, they would put you in a job that was different, or they would say you're not a doctor anymore, you're going to do something else, etc. So they'd make you redundant, which would take away that meaning. They would take away your physical items. He even talks about how like they would put your items in a box when you got to the camp and say you're never going to see these items again. So it was like confirmed that you would never see those items again. So the material items that you might possess that are externally generated, they would take that away. And then they would also take away your relationships, your family, your friends. Maybe if you had a wife, they'd separate you and you'd never see them again. And they really made you know that you would never see those people again. And then often what he observed, anecdotally, of course, was that people who couldn't find a new meaning to exist would often just perish more quickly, essentially from broken heart, no reason to live. And the three things I've just mentioned, the aesthetics, the job, the relationships, the material items, those are all externally generated. So like the world gives those to you, but because of entropy, like the world and worst case scenarios in the German context, those things can all be taken away from you, which makes those whys temporary at best and not stable, because if the worst case scenario happens to you, you can lose all of those things very quickly, as you can imagine. So he found that there was this fourth sort of meaning generation possibility, which was that you could generate meaning internally as opposed to externally deriving it. And the internal generation people did very well. And like I said, that was the people who were religious, so had a strong religious capacity, or people who decided to suffer well. And that's the key term. So whenever I'm in a bad situation, I choose to suffer well, because you can always choose to suffer poorly or suffer well. And because that's a binary choice you get to pick, you're always in a situation where you're not in even if you're in the worst case physical situation, internally, you can find the reason to persevere because you can choose to suffer well. And just to break this up even maybe one layer deeper, in the philosophical pursuit, let's say, you can break the world down into essence versus existence. So essence is that God came down, a third party entity beyond you or beyond humanity comes down and sets the table, sets the rules of the game. So in Viktor Frankl's context, he said that people who had strong religious tradition often did better. Now, of course, if you got sent to the gas chamber or you got a bullet, like it doesn't matter how religious you are, like you're still going to die. But those people kept their conscience clean and their soul intact because they were able to generate meaning internally from the God concept or their religious framework, because the meaning to survive or thrive even is internally derived as opposed to externally given to you. So in that context, the religious people did really well, and that's essence. And then on the other side is existence, which is essentially the position in existentialist philosophy that the world isn't set for you. You're just an inhabitant in it and you set the meaning. So you can both be religious and apply this suffering well mindset, or you can be a hardcore atheist and also apply it. So it's secularized enough that you can apply it across both lenses of essence. God did it. God gives meaning to the world, or you give meaning to the world, which is existentialism or existence-based ethics, I suppose, or epistemology. So doesn't matter which one you take, you can blend them in together. So if I say, for example, keep your soul intact, it's a bit more of a religious kind of language, but you can also just secularize it. Or if I say like the word God, you can secularize that as well as the logos or nature. Cool. So from this logotherapeutic point of view, the people who did the best, whose consciences were clean, did the best in the camps. Even though they might perish, they didn't die from a lack of meaning. And that's super useful. And then in the book, which is a fantastic read, Man's Search for Meaning by Viktor Frankl, top 3 book for me, read it for sure. It was very interesting to hear like the anecdotes where like even the prison guards who might be like satanic or looking to inflict pain, let's say, the opposite of good, would sometimes, in his anecdotal opinion, kind of like treat those prisoners better who had a very strong faith position or a very strong reason to live for whatever internally generated reason they had picked up. And that stuck with him. And so then he created logotherapy, which is a branch of psychotherapy, to help with people when they have had difficult circumstances. So I actually like the psychiatric element of it, or the psychological component of it, but the core foundation is suffering well. And then to add another kicker on this, if you read the Gulag Archipelago by Solzhenitsyn, where he documents in extensive detail, it's an awfully terrible, amazing book, which is worth the read, even though it's like 1,500 pages or whatever. If you read that, it's a summation of all the torture and terrible things that happened in the Russian Gulag system, essentially, over a very long period of time. And in that, you can see the same observation, which is that the people who are super religious or had some sort of internal reason generating their why could bear the how, as Nietzsche would say. So the people that did the best in the camps were those that kept their conscience clean. They only did what they thought was right. Their soul was intact, and they chose to suffer courageously versus suffering poorly. Again, you can choose. So even if you're in that jail cell being tortured and there's like you're essentially in hell, the worst case possible scenario for you, you can still choose to suffer well. And that will give you, at least for me, a wellspring, an unending reason to continue to exist, which is not nothing, especially when you're at the lowest rung of where you can be. So for me, and that's really interesting. So Solzhenitsyn and Viktor Frankl have the same anecdotal observations. And I think that that's super useful because that were some of the most extreme scenarios on the planet ever conceived, like torture beyond torture. And the people who had this internal generation, whether from a strong religious tradition, that essence, or existence, where they internally chose to suffer well versus suffer poorly, to keep their conscience clean, their soul intact, not physically thrived in the sense, because if you're starving, but in their internal framework, was kept intact. The citadel, the Stoic citadel, let's say, was robust. And even in the Solzhenitsyn case, it was extremely interesting because people were forced to give up all their external reasons to live, let's say, and find that internal one. And after the 30 years in the Gulag, a lot of people, when they were interviewing or talking with him, would say, I was so glad for that experience because it forced me to figure out that as long as my soul is clean, as long as my conscience is good, then everything is fine. So they felt bad for the jail guards who tortured them because they're like, they must be so conflicted. Everything, their reason to exist is externalized, where mine is internalized. And again, that's a beautiful synchronicity with the Viktor Frankl stuff and the Solzhenitsyn stuff lining up over top. So this has worked for me in many occasions because life is highs and lows. So when I've been at my physical, where I think I'm physically going to pass away, there's been a few moments in my life where that's happened to me. I have used that method to not revive myself, but continue to move quickly. So I'll give you an example. I talked about this before in a different video, but one time I had a autoimmune disorder for like a short period of time, and I thought I was going to die. For some reason, I get like anaphylaxis, like the choking, and I get like hives and like bumps on my skin and stuff. It's really weird. Anyway, so I ended up in the hospital. My mom came, and that's a bad sign because when she comes, like, it's serious, And I was in the hospital by myself late at night, and I could hear I've been like in the hospital for 3 or 4 days, and the internist specialist doctors were behind this sheet, and they were talking, and I could hear them. They thought I was asleep, 3 a.m, something like that. And they were like, oh, well, we think he's got this disease profile. And they said something like, I can't even remember what it's called, but they said it was like, ABC disease or something. Oh, super rare, super rare. And I had my phone with me. So I just typed in like ABC disease, whatever it was. And it came back was like 1 in a million people have this. It's instant death. Like you die painfully. Like it's just the worst possible thing. And everyone knows when you go on Google and you type in your symptoms, like it leads to panic. And this was like super exhausted. I'm like not well. I'm considering that I'm going to die potentially. And this just like sealed it. So I was 100% like, I'm dead. Like I'm cooked in 12 hours. It's going to be game over or whatever it said on the fucking Google. And I hit like rock bottom. So all my philosophical frameworks evaporated of how to maneuver through the day. And I was essentially in the void. All my external reasons to live were essentially diminished. And I was just lost in the void. And I recalled the Viktor Frankl stuff, the logotherapy. And I thought, oh, I can choose this scenario to suffer well or suffer poorly. And as soon as I chose to suffer meaningfully or courageously, I instantly felt whole again. I went from scattered to rock solid. And a nurse came in to like, I don't know, check on me or whatever. And I was like, hey, and I like cracked a joke and I was like silly because I felt like that was the right thing to do. And then I thought, I got this. And I was 100% certain I was going to die. So it turns out it was not that. They did a test for that specific disease or whatever the hell whatever I Googled, and it wasn't that. And I actually just had an autoimmune thing, and eventually I got over that, and everything's good. Thank you for your, compassion. But that's a key example where that actually worked. I've also had this a few times in the sort of like not physical death per se, but like reputational death. And I won't go into that story per se. It's not the right time yet, but for that. But essentially, I was put in a situation where my reputation was put into a difficult situation, hypothetically. And for whatever reason, that kind of went through my arm a little bit. And I thought, oh, my reputation is going to be destroyed in like the professional context. For whatever reason. And again, I was like, no, regardless of what happens to that, because again, that's outside of my control. The world, I can't control the world. Outcomes are outside of my control. And so when I had this sort of reputational threat, let's say, for whatever reason, it sent me down to the rock bottom again. And I was able to go, no, like I'm going to suffer through this courageously. And then as soon as I had that, boom, I was rock solid again. And that allowed me to action things and eventually overcome that scenario with no reputational damage, which was fantastic. So essentially, this strategy I've used in several different occasions, and to me now it's like battle tested. I've been through enough scenarios in my life where this has really been useful. Even when I broke my back, I couldn't really walk very well. I thought I was going to be essentially disabled for the rest of my life. When I first got out of the surgery, I was like way worse than when I went in at the second surgery. And I could barely walk even like a week afterwards. I could walk like 30 meters maybe, and that was it. Pain like crazy. And I thought, is this my life? And it was negative. But I thought, no, I can suffer through this well. I can be useful in my own mind, or I can suffer poorly. And as soon as I suffer well, it's like boom. It's like the background music cues. Like I feel like courageous. I'm like Superman in my mind, And I just power through it. Even if I have to repeat that to myself every 15 seconds, you know what I'm saying? But it's battle tested for me now. I've kind of gone through the whole gamut of possibilities, minus like the gulag itself. But I've definitely been in the mental gulag, and I've definitely been in a sense of where I'm going to perish essentially. And that has been my absolute rock bottom steady thing, because no one can take it away from me. It's my citadel. I can sit in that and I can just repeat that over and over again. I'm going to suffer courageously. So if you are in hell, you can choose to suffer hell well. Of course, move out of that place as fast as you can. But internally, there's no scenario where you can't generate this, either from the essence side or the existence side. And I think this is super powerful. And everyone who embraces this, I've had a few friends kind of come to Jesus on this to an extent, like come to embrace this topic. And the feedback I get from them, like years later, are like, this is it. I've used this and it's been effective. So it's not just me. It's also, if you read those books like the Gulag Archipelago and Man's Search for Meaning, I think you'll be hit on the face, with the stick. And go, oh, this is something that's useful. Whether you're super duper religious in a theological sense, or you're just more of a poor man's philosopher like myself. So I hope that was useful. It's really useful for me. I hope someone finds this compelling and embraces it in their own life. I think it'll make your life more meaningful and you'll suffer less unnecessarily. So hope you have a great day. I'll catch you on the next video.